Indian village site that dates, we think, to about AD 14 or 1500. We came here, we've been working on the Yadkin River for about 15 years, and we've been moving upstream from about the Winston-Salem area on up. This is our first excavation here in Wilkes County, and we didn't really know what to expect when we got here, but we've been finding some fairly interesting things. It's early in the dig yet, so we'll know more as we progress. See what I mean? Right now we've got about 15 units open, and we have found lots of features. We haven't excavated any of them yet, but it looks like we may have some old Indian houses coming up. We've got the patterns from the post holes in the ground, and looks like some trash pits up there. So we're pretty excited to see what all that's going to turn up once we get into them. One research objective that Wake Forest has been interested in since we've been doing this work is looking at the nature of the boundary, which lies somewhere between where we're sitting right now and upstream on the Yadkin, with the Cherokee versus the Siouan Indians who lived here several centuries ago. This area, we think, was part of the Siouan tradition. Further downstream, where we've concentrated a lot of our work in past years, has all belonged to the Siouan tradition. And right now we're looking for where that boundary exactly lies between the Siouan and the Cherokee, which is one reason why this site is so interesting. One thing that we are finding right now is that the pottery is a little bit different. Although it looks very Siouan in many ways, it has certain characteristics that we've never seen before, and we think that this may have something to do with the influence of the Cherokee a little further to the west, who of course had a very different cultural system and social organization. So that's one thing that we're going to be studying as we look at what we can excavate from this site.
When we came to this site was to try and understand the geological processes that created this, and the geological processes that affected the archaeological deposits. This is a test unit that is at a fairly low elevation on the site, and we can see from these sands here that it's been flooded. These are coarse river sands that had to be laid by fast-flowing water, and then below that are some finer grained silts and clays that also were laid by water. So it's fairly clear that this portion of the site has been flooded, has been cut, and that's probably why we don't find in this area of the site any of the features such as the trash pits and house posts and such that we see on the higher elevations. So the site has been affected by the river, but we're fortunate that on the knolls and rises here, we do get better preservation of the remains.
Let me tell you about the most exciting thing that's happened in my life in a long time. My name is not important. I live in the western part of North Carolina along the Yadkin River. This summer, 1990, a crew from Wake Forest University came down to do a dig. There were 6 students, 2 instructors. And I got the bright idea that I would like to tell a story about a dig, because I knew nothing about a dig and still don't know very much. So I approached them and asked them if I could make a videotape and tell a story about the dig.
Well, actually, we don't know as much as we know very little about the Siouan Indians who lived along the Yadkin in the late woodland, which is the time period that we're studying. The late woodland lasts from about AD 1000 up to contact times, about 1500, maybe a little later than that. And It's called Siouan simply because in the 19th century it was discovered that the tribes living in the Piedmont of North Carolina spoke languages that were of Siouan derivation. So, hence the name Siouan. What we know of them really is just some sporadic information gathered from early European explorers through the area and archaeology that has been done in the Piedmont in the last 50 or 60 years.
Well, the Siouan language is distantly related to the Sioux, which everyone's heard of. They're Plains Indians. But North Carolina has three major linguistic groups: the Algonquin speakers along the coast, and the Siouan Indians of the Piedmont, and then the Cherokee of the mountains, which speak a language unrelated to Siouan. It's related, interestingly, to Iroquois in the Northeast. But as Rhea said, we don't know very much about these people because they were all gone before any explorers got into the area to record their customs. It seems that they were very small tribes: the Occaneechi, the Kiowa, the Eno, the Sara, the Tutelo. All of these are known only, I suppose, to some anthropologists and very few others, because they're not very spectacular groups. They didn't have any major notable achievements during the historic period. They didn't slaughter thousands of colonists or fight against the British on our side or do any other things that would get them into the history books. And they seem to have died very quickly from European introduced diseases. So by the time anyone began to settle in the Piedmont that had an interest in recording the customs of the natives, they were long gone. Probably most of them dead of smallpox or other European diseases. So the only way we can learn about them, as Rhea said, is a few scraps of information that the early explorers wrote down, and we think that a lot of that was made up out of the whole cloth to impress their friends in Europe, and what we learned through archaeology. So we're trying to learn a little bit more about the groups along the Yadkin. They probably were Siouan speakers, but we have no idea what tribe they belong to, and it's unlikely we'll ever know that. We're trying to learn a little bit more about what they were like in that 500-year period just before the Europeans came and essentially destroyed their cultures. We can be confident that the Indians have been in North Carolina for at least 12,000 years. So we're really looking at the very, very end of the Indian cultures in the state. Other archaeologists study the earlier periods, but Rhea and I have focused on the late period because we're interested in why these Indians succumbed to the European invasion so easily. The Cherokee, for example, held out well into the 19th century and effectively stopped any white encroachment into their territory. But in the Piedmont, it seems that they simply folded their tents, although they didn't live in tents, and slipped away. And why they were so easily dislodged or killed is something that probably has to do with the way their societies were organized. And we think that they were small autonomous villages, unable to create some effective confederacy or supra-local grouping to oppose the Europeans. And so we're interested in what sort of social dynamics might have contributed to that, an inability to halt the European invasion. And in order to understand that, we need to look back into the prehistoric past to see what sort of social systems were present at that time, because, of course, those were the ones that were in operation when the Europeans did arrive. And essentially, that's what our research has been focused on: the social organization of these groups, how they got along with one another, how they traded with one another, how their villages were organized, and what sort of leadership they might have had within the village and between villages. And lately, we've also become interested in how the Siouan groups of the Yadkin Valley, how they related to the Cherokee in the mountains, and probably the Catawba were in the foothills of the Blue Ridge also. How these Siouan speakers interacted with these groups that were completely different from them in terms of customs and language and probably even the way their societies were organized. Very different systems. How did they get along? Were they enemies, implacable enemies? Did they fight, or did they trade? Did they have, you know, love feasts? What did they do when they met these other groups? And in fact, that's what brought us to Wilkes County.
Is that during the late woodland, settlement almost invariably is along the floodplain of major rivers like the Yadkin, and you see the same pattern in the Dan River drainage and the Haw and the Eno. And apparently, because they were horticulturalists, they preferred these loose sandy soils of the floodplain. So it seems that that's one thing that attracted to them to this floodplain area, as well as some of the resources that you can find there in addition to the soil, such as, you know, the fish and the shellfish, the different birds that would be along the waterways. And I suppose that it would have something to do with trading, in that a river is a natural traveling course. You can easily find your way, I suppose, up and down a river. And we do have an indication that they were, in fact, trading with other groups, somewhat, I suppose, within their own villages, you know, that are dispersed along the Yadkin River, but also apparently somewhat far away, because occasionally we find items like marine shell, which obviously has to come from the coastal area, maybe Florida, or perhaps just along North Carolina or South Carolina coasts. We really don't know for sure. But anyway, as you know, today it's a long drive to get to the ocean, so these items will be coming over long distances, so they do have some contact with people, distant peoples. We also see that they are apparently involved in a lithic exchange network. The kinds of material, stone material, that they apparently preferred to make their stone tools out of, especially their arrow points, is not derived locally, but seems to come, some of it from Tennessee, but a greater portion of it from much farther south, from the Carolina Slate Belt, which is down around Salisbury, that Asheboro, in that area. So it's many, many miles from here. And we think because these people, as I said, they were agriculturalists, and they seem to be living in semi-permanent or permanent villages along the river, so they weren't as mobile. It wasn't as easy for them just to pick up and travel 100 miles to go procure some stone that they needed to make their tools and then bring it back. And so we think that they engaged in some trade. What they were trading for the stone, we don't know, but it seems from some of the work that we've done farther downstream, and we have no reason to think it's not similar here based on the types of raw materials that we're finding, that they're acquiring, some of these large villages are acquiring the lithics in a sort of semi-finished state. In other words, rather than just getting a big hunk of rock, you get a blank, something that could be found